Welcome to Business Recipe. Every business has a recipe. Here's theirs. Today's recipe, the phone that lost. On the morning of February 11, 2011, Stephen Elop, Nokia's CEO hired just 5 months earlier from Microsoft, sent a memo to all 132,000 Nokia employees. He called it the burning platform. He described Nokia as a man standing on an oil rig that has caught fire. The man has two choices. He can stay on the burning platform, or he can jump into the freezing North Sea. That memo leaked to the public the same day. Nokia's stock fell roughly 14%, and 3 years later, Microsoft paid $7.2 billion for the wreckage. This is the recipe for what happens when a panic masquerades as a strategy. Here's what this recipe contains. First, how Nokia went from 40% of the world's mobile phones to a company desperate enough to bet its future on a third-place operating system. Second, what was really driving Steve Ballmer when he shouted down his own board, including Bill Gates and Satya Nadella, to force through a $7.2 billion acquisition they didn't want. And third, why the moment Nadella became CEO, the deal was already dead. He just had to wait 14 months to say so officially. There is also a theory, a Finnish theory whispered in boardrooms and coded into the math of one man's severance package. We will examine that theory. We will not settle it, but we will show you the numbers and let you decide. The ingredients for this disaster were assembled over a decade. In 2007, Nokia controlled 40% of the global mobile phone market. 40%. It shipped more phones than Samsung, Motorola, and Sony Ericsson combined. Its market capitalization sat above $150 billion. In Finland, Nokia was not just a company, it was a national identity. Then Apple announced the iPhone in January 2007. Steve Ballmer, Microsoft's CEO, watched the announcement and laughed. On camera, he said the iPhone would not be successful because it had no keyboard and was too expensive. He predicted it would never gain significant market share. Nokia's leadership had a different reaction. They studied the iPhone and concluded it was a niche product for consumers, not business users. Their Symbian operating system was battle-tested, carrier-approved, and globally distributed across hundreds of models. Why would they panic? They had every reason to feel confident. They had every ingredient for continued dominance. Manufacturing scale, carrier relationships, 1 billion customers who already owned Nokia phones. What they did not have was a software culture. Nokia built hardware. Apple built an ecosystem. And by 2009, Android was building the pipes that would route around Nokia entirely. By September 2010, Nokia's board was desperate enough to hire its first non-Finnish CEO in 149 years. A Canadian, a former Microsoft executive. His name was Stephen Elop, and Nokia paid him to fix a problem that was already 3 years old. Here's the method Elop chose, and here's why it backfired in a way that even his critics did not anticipate. In February 2011, 5 months into the job, Elop had concluded Nokia's operating system, Symbian, was uncompetitive against Android and iOS. He was not wrong about that. The question was, what you do next? On February 11, 2011, Nokia announced it would abandon Symbian and partner with Microsoft, making Windows Phone its primary smartphone platform. The move was accompanied by a memo so brutal in its self-assessment that Nokia's own board chairman, Jorma Ollila, later said it showed poor judgment. The memo described Nokia as standing on a burning oil rig. The only escape was to jump. What the memo did not say clearly was that Nokia was jumping into Microsoft's ecosystem, not building its own. Nokia's stock fell 14% that day. Symbian engineers in Nokia's Oulu office, roughly 1,000 of them, understood what the announcement meant. Several walked out. A Finnish trade union demanded $100,000 in compensation for every worker who would eventually be laid off. But the deeper damage was something that took months to measure. The moment Elop announced Nokia was leaving Symbian, consumers stopped buying Nokia's existing phones. Why pay premium price for a phone the CEO just called obsolete? Nokia's UK smartphone share had been 23% in September 2010. By February 2011, The month of the memo, it was 12.4%. By September 2011, 6 months later, it was 6.7%. The first Lumia had not yet shipped. Nokia had announced a retreat, but had no replacement ready. The window between abandoning the old platform and launching the new one lasted nearly 12 months. That 12-month gap is the method. That is how you cook collapse. By 2013, the result was already visible before any acquisition happened. Nokia had launched the Lumia line in late 2011. The hardware was good. The Lumia 920 had a better camera than most Android phones at the time and a build quality that reviewers praised. It did not matter. Windows Phone had 3.3% global market share. Nokia accounted for 81.6% of every Windows Phone sold, meaning Nokia's fate and Windows Phone's fate were now identical. If the platform failed, Nokia had no fallback. Nokia had killed Symbian, walked away from developing its own MeeGo operating system, and tied its entire future to a platform that no developer wanted to build for, and no carrier wanted to push. The app gap was brutal. Windows Phone had 150,000 apps. The App Store and Google Play each had over 1 million. Major banks, major airlines, major games, missing or years late. Developers went where the users were. Users went where the apps were. Nokia was outside the loop. Nokia had been valued at $29.5 billion the day Elop took the job in September 2010. By the time Microsoft announced the acquisition in September 2013, Nokia's market capitalization had fallen to $11.1 billion. In 3 years, $18.4 billion in value had disappeared. Microsoft was buying the aftermath of that collapse for $7.2 billion. Before we go further, the counterarguments, because there were real ones. The strongest case for the acquisition, Microsoft had no choice but to own the hardware. The partnership was not working. If Nokia collapsed, Windows Phone had no flagship. Buying Nokia guaranteed a hardware division, 25,000 engineers, and thousands of patents. Without the acquisition, Windows Phone might have died years earlier. Second argument, the price reflected the distressed asset. Microsoft paid $7.2 billion for a company that had been worth $150 billion. Even a modest turnaround would have made the deal look brilliant. The bear case required Nokia to keep failing, which was not guaranteed. These were real arguments. Analysts made them in September 2013. But here's what both arguments required to be true: that Windows Phone could reach the scale needed to justify the investment. That required developer adoption. Developer adoption required users. Users required being competitive with Android and iOS, which together controlled 95% of the market. Satya Nadella, then running Microsoft's cloud business, voted no in Ballmer's internal poll. His exact reasoning: I did not get why the world needed a third ecosystem in phones unless we changed the rules. They were not changing the rules. They were buying a handset maker. So who ate this recipe? Let us start with the man who cooked it. In June 2013, Steve Ballmer called a Microsoft board meeting. He wanted to buy Nokia. The board said no. Bill Gates said no. Satya Nadella said no. Ballmer shouted. According to Bloomberg's reporting, his shouts were audible in the hallway outside the conference room. He told the board if they did not approve this deal, he would not remain as CEO. The board compromised. Ballmer got the handsets, but not Nokia's HERE mapping platform, which Nokia retained and later sold to a consortium of German automakers, BMW, Daimler, and Audi, for $2.8 billion in 2015. Microsoft bought the decaying business. Nokia kept the valuable parts. On September 2, 2013, Ballmer emailed all Microsoft employees calling the deal a bold step into the future. Nokia Windows phones, he wrote, were the fastest-growing phones in the smartphone market. 3 weeks later at Microsoft's analyst meeting, he said this: "If there's one thing I regret that there was a period in the early 2000s when we were so focused on Windows that we weren't able to redeploy talent to the new device called the phone." He regretted missing mobile. He spent $7.2 billion to buy back into mobile at 3.3% market share. In the same month, the deal closed April 25, 2014. Nadella had become CEO in February, already opposed. He now owned 25,000 Nokia employees and a phone business losing ground by the quarter. In July 2014, Nadella announced 18,000 layoffs. About 2,500 were former Nokia positions. In July 2015, another 7,800 cuts, primarily phone hardware. Start with 25,000 Nokia employees who moved to Microsoft. Only about 1 in 5 remained when the restructuring was done. On July 8, 2015, 14 months after the deal closed, Microsoft recorded a $7.6 billion impairment charge. The deal cost $7.2 billion. The write-off was $7.6 billion. Microsoft wrote off more than it paid. If this story changed how you see acquisitions, subscribe to Business Recipe. We cover the deals that sound like vision and cost everything. There is one more ingredient worth examining, not as fact, but as a question the numbers raise. When Stephen Elop was hired as Nokia CEO in September 2010, his contract included a standard executive provision. If Nokia was acquired, his unvested stock awards would vest immediately. All of them. When the Microsoft acquisition completed in April 2014, Elop received approximately $25.5 million. His stock awards, roughly $19.9 million of that total, vested all at once because of the change of control clause. His final total payout reached $33 million. Microsoft paid 70% of his exit package. Nokia paid the rest. Finnish journalists Pekka Nikkanen and Marina Salminen spent years investigating the Trojan horse theory. They conducted over 100 interviews. Their conclusion: the conspiracy theory is without basis. Elop was not planted. Their secondary conclusion: Elop was, in their words, one of the worst CEOs in the world, if not the worst. Nokia was valued at $29.5 billion the day he started. 3 years later, it sold for $11.1 billion. The burning platform memo accelerated the destruction of the asset he was hired to save. Whether by design or by catastrophic incompetence, the outcome was identical. Every acquisition that fails this spectacularly leaves signs. 3 of them matter here. Sign 1. When a CEO buys something to solve his own regret, the board should ask harder questions. Ballmer told analysts in September 2013 that missing mobile was his biggest career regret. Then, in the same month, he closed a $7.2 billion deal to buy back into mobile at the worst possible moment. Regret is a dangerous acquisition motive. Recall the burning platform memo. It was not a Nokia strategy document. It was a confession that Nokia had no strategy. Buying a company mid-confession is not a turnaround investment. It is a panic purchase. Sign 2. When the acquiree's strength is distribution and the acquirer's need is ecosystem, the deal cannot close the gap. Nokia's value was physical, hardware expertise, carrier contracts, manufacturing. What Microsoft needed was software momentum, developer loyalty, and App Store network effects. You cannot acquire network effects. You can only grow them. Nokia's distribution was irrelevant when the apps weren't there. Recall the 12-month gap between abandoning Symbian and shipping the first Lumia. A company in structural transition cannot simultaneously be your growth engine. Sign 3. When the incoming CEO votes no, the outgoing CEO should listen. Satya Nadella was running Microsoft's cloud business in 2013. He voted against the Nokia deal. His reasoning: the world did not need a third phone ecosystem unless the rules changed. The rules did not change. Cloud computing changed everything else about Microsoft. Mobile did not. By July 2015, Nadella had taken that $7.6 billion charge and began reorienting the company toward Azure. That pivot made Microsoft one of the most valuable companies on Earth. The Nokia detour cost 1 year of momentum and $7.6 billion of cash. The recipe for this disaster was never complicated. Take a market leader who stopped evolving, add a CEO hired from the company that would eventually buy you, apply a memo so damaging it killed consumer confidence before the replacement was ready. Mix in a panicked acquirer who shouted at his own board to force through a deal nobody wanted. The result: $7.6 billion written off. 20,000 people laid off. A phone brand retired. Who ate it? The 132,000 employees who read that burning platform memo. The 20,000 who lost their jobs. the Microsoft shareholders who funded a $7.2 billion lesson in why fear is not a strategy. If this story changed how you think about acquisitions, subscribe to Business Recipe. Next, we look at another company that bought something it could not fix. Today's recipe, complete. So, what business should we crack open next? Drop the company name in the comments. We read them. If you want more case studies like this one, subscribe. New recipe every Tuesday.